Welcome once again to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking on an institution that, well, it really defines culinary excellence across the globe.
It does.
It's an arbiter of taste and prestige so powerful that just one symbol in its little red book can change a chef's life, their business, their reputation, forever.
It's huge.
We are diving into the complex, the very secretive, and sometimes pretty explosive world of the Michelin Guide.
And it is a truly remarkable story, especially when you start to unpack the contradiction at its very core.
Right.
You have this French publication, it's over a century old, and it dictates the absolute pinnacle of global fine dining. But its entire existence is thanks to, and I mean, it's still funded by a tire company.
A tire company.
How does the ultimate authority on haute cuisine even relate to rubber and road maps? That connection, which seems almost impossible, is the foundation of this whole global empire.
It's the ultimate business pivot, isn't it? I mean, how did a company famous for tires and their wonderfully rotund mascot by GandM, the Michelin Man, how did they become the undisputed authority on whether a chef is just serving high-quality cooking or creating, an artistic masterpiece? That contradiction is really the mystery we're unraveling today.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to peel back that famous red cover and go way beyond the prestige. We need to understand not just what those stars really mean, but how this whole secretive system works.
Logistically, financially?
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, we have to look critically at the immense pressure, the financial deals, the controversies, the very real mental health costs that underpins this institution as it just expands aggressively into every new market.
So if you have ever looked at a 3-star review and wondered about the history, the sacrifices, the sheer expense that went into that one perfect plate, well, this deep dive is your shortcut to being very well informed.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start exactly where the story begins.
The very beginning.
France, the year 1900. And when Edouard and André Michelin first published their guide, the whole automotive landscape was, well, it was almost non-existent. Our sources say there were fewer than 3,000 cars.
In the entire country.
The entire country. Imagine that.
That number, it just puts everything into perspective. The guide was never, ever meant to be a gourmet rating system. It was pure marketing genius.
Just brilliant.
The brothers, they ran a tire factory. They needed to increase demand for their main product. So the goal was simple. Get people to drive, travel longer distances, wear down their tires.
And buy new ones. It's a beautifully simple market creation strategy. The first guide, Michelin, was basically an instruction manual to, ease the anxiety of early driving.
And they printed nearly 35,000 copies.
Which is a staggering number when you think about how few people actually owned a car. They were giving away like 7 copies for every vehicle in France.
And the guide itself, it reflected the real practical needs of road travel back then. It wasn't about fine dining at all.
Not at all.
It had maps, instructions for fixing tires, lists of mechanics, petrol stations, and some basic hotel listings. It was a utility, necessary tool if you were going on any kind of trip.
And this free booklet, they printed it for 20 years, even through World War I. But then we get to this pivotal moment, 1920, that just changed the whole direction of the guide.
Ah, yes, the 1920 moment. It's legendary in the guide's history. So the story goes, André Michelin was in a tire shop, and he saw copies of his guide being used to prop up a workbench.
Oh, no.
And he realized, because it was free, people treated it like it was disposable. So he came up with this principle. Man only truly respects what he pays for.
That's a harsh, but, a pretty pragmatic business lesson.
It is,
yeah.
Especially with the cost of printing all those guides. So they started charging for it. 7.50 francs, which was about $2.15 back in 1922.
And that small price tag, it instantly elevated the guide. It went from a free handout to a respected publication.
And that shift to a paid product was the catalyst for huge changes. First, they removed all advertisements. That was critical for signaling impartiality.
Good move.
Then they reorganized the restaurant listings into categories, showing they were getting serious about the culinary side. And third, and this is the most crucial part for their future reputation, they recruited a team of anonymous inspectors.
And that system, the anonymous paid review, is still the single most important thing today. It's the core promise of the whole brand. But the star system, we all know, that didn't just appear overnight.
No, it evolved. They started awarding stars in 1926, probably inspired by other travel guides. But at first, it was just a single star, a simple recognition of a good table.
The real structure we recognize came later, in 1931. That's when they introduced the 0, 1, 2, and 3-star hierarchy.
And then, in 1936, the official criteria were finally published, and publishing them was a masterstroke. It gave the whole system this formal, structured weight it needed to be taken seriously.
And its impact went beyond just food. I mean, it says a lot about their early dedication to map making that the 1939 guide was actually reprinted in 1944.
At the direct request of the Allied forces, right?
Exactly. They relied on its maps as the best, most up-to-date documents for navigating France during the liberation. It's an incredible little military footnote.
It really is. And when they started publishing again in 1945, after the war, the shortages were still a big problem. So Michelin actually put an up limit of just 2 stars until 1950.
Which shows how seriously they took the standards, even then.
This history shows a very French, very deliberate, slowly expanding institution. Their expansion was cautious. The first guide for Italy in 1956 had 0 stars in its first edition.
0.
And it wasn't until 1974 that the first guide to Britain since the 30s was published, and even then it awarded only 25 stars.
But then fast forward to the 21st century, and that pace just explodes. The strategy shifts from this careful European expansion to just rapid global market takeover.
It really does. 2005, the first American guide for New York City. Then the huge entry into Asia. Tokyo in 2007, Hong Kong and Macau in 2008.
And that global shift even changed their internal structure. In 2008, a really key change happened.
Right. Juliane Caspar, a German restaurateur, was appointed as the first woman and the first non-French editor-in-chief of the French edition. That was a huge symbolic move.
I remember the German paper Die Welt had that hilarious take on it. They said the decision was, like Mercedes announcing that its new director of product development is a Martian.
Yeah, given how the French traditionally view German food, that's about right. But the message was clear. Michelin was positioning itself as a universal, not just a French institution.
Which brings us right up to today, where the guide is published all over the world. But to really get the power of this thing, we have to talk about the criteria that dictate everything.
Okay, this is the heart of it. The stars. And the definitions are not casual, they are almost legalistic in their precision.
Let's start at the absolute top. The goal for every ambitious chef in the world. 3 Michelin stars.
The definition is completely unambiguous. Exceptional cuisine, worth a special journey.
The French phrasing is just as powerful. Une des meilleures cuisines vaut le voyage. So what does that actually mean for a restaurant?
It means the standard is nothing short of superlative. The cooking is by a chef at the absolute peak of their profession. Their dishes are basically art, destined to become classics.
So Michelin is literally telling you to plan your vacation around this one meal.
Exactly. Book flights, hotels, everything for the sole purpose of eating there. This means perfection is mandatory, not just in the food, but the ingredients, the service, the atmosphere. It requires a huge investment.
That sets the stakes incredibly high. Okay, let's contrast that with 2 stars. Excellent cooking worth a detour.
The jump here is still massive. 2 stars means the chef's personality and talent are obvious. The dishes are refined, inspired. You can see their signature style.
So you might not fly across the globe for it.
Right. But if you're in the region, say within a few hundred miles, Michelin is telling you to absolutely rearrange your travel plans to experience it. It's an endorsement of unique personal cooking.
And then the foundation of the whole system, the 1 star. High quality cooking, worth a stop.
The 1-star rating is all about consistency. The dishes have to have distinct flavors, be prepared to a consistently high standard using top quality ingredients. The inspectors are looking for technical mastery and reliability.
And for a young restaurant, getting that 1st star is life-changing. It validates everything.
Absolutely. Now, what makes these ratings so powerful is the process, the famous cloak of anonymity.
This is where they invest their whole reputation, right?
It's their ultimate differentiator. Inspectors visit anonymously. Critically, all their meals and expenses are paid for by Michelin. They take meticulous notes, write detailed reports, and then argue it out in these annual stars meetings.
And the lengths they go to for secrecy are just. They're extraordinary. We know that many of the company's own top executives have never even met an inspector.
And the inspectors are told not to tell anyone their line of work, not even their parents. It prevents any kind of influence or leaks. It really is a silent, secret service for food.
And that secrecy is why the guide has so much weight. When it's published each year in France, it's like the Academy Awards for food. Everyone is speculating.
Who gained a star, who lost one, is high drama.
They also have this rising stars designation, which is fascinating. It's like a signal to the industry that a restaurant is on the cusp of getting a star or another star.
It's basically high-level corporate foreshadowing. It directs attention and investment.
But the guide isn't just about super expensive meals, which is important. It's more than just the stars.
That's right. They recognize people want quality food at all kinds of price points, so you have other key designations.
The first, and probably the most loved by diners on a budget, is the Bib Gourmand.
Introduced in 1997, it highlights restaurants with exceptionally good food at moderate prices. And moderate is the key word here because it's determined by local economic standards.
So it's relative.
Totally relative. In 2022, a Bib Gourmand in Canada had to offer a two-course meal and dessert or wine for under 60 Canadian dollars. In a high-cost place like Switzerland, the limit was 70 Swiss francs, which, for Switzerland, is an amazing value.
And the Bib Gourmand is often a launch pad for talent. We saw that with the Chicago restaurant Kasama. They got a Bib Gourmand one year, then a full Michelin star the next, becoming America's only Michelin-starred Filipino restaurant.
It shows the guide can spot quality before the price gets crazy. And beyond price, they've also started to focus on sustainability. In 2020, they launched the Green Star,
which recognizes excellence in sustainable gastronomy. And a restaurant can hold it along with a regular star or a Bib Gourmand.
Exactly. The chef has to detail their whole vision for sustainability on the website, from waste management to local sourcing.
Which is really forward-thinking. But I did notice a strange detail in our source material. As of late 2025, the green stars weren't a searchable filter on their website anymore, even though they were still giving out the award.
Huh. That's
Yeah.
an interesting technical lapse. It suggests some kind of internal debate over how to prioritize it.
Maybe. And then for most restaurants that just serve really good food, there's the basic tier. It used to be called the plate, but now it's just selected restaurants.
It's the entry-level recognition.
And finally, we should just touch on the full scope of their ambition, because it's not just food.
No. They're trying to cover the whole travel experience. Starting in 2024, they made a massive move into hotels with the Michelin keys.
It's their attempt to do for hotels what they did for restaurants. And again, it's all based on anonymous assessment.
Based on 5 criteria: architecture and design, quality of service, personality, value, and contribution to the neighborhood.
Wait, so a tire company is now judging architecture and interior design. I mean, how far are they going to extend their brand authority? It's pretty bold.
It speaks to their confidence. And it extends to atmosphere, too. You have the forks and spoons rating, 1 to 5, for comfort. If they're colored red, it means it's a pleasant experience.
And don't forget the other symbols, the coin for budget menus, and then the grapes or sake sets for places with interesting drink selections. It really is meant to be a comprehensive travel Bible.
It is, which brings us to their global expansion and how they're paying for it.
Right. We established they've been expanding like crazy since the early 2000s. The scale is just massive.
It's a total explosion.
Yeah.
After New York and Tokyo, the 2020 saw this huge acceleration. Canada, Florida in 2022.
And then Vietnam, Malaysia, Estonia, the UAE, all in late 2022. And it hasn't slowed down. Now we're seeing Argentina, Mexico, Qatar, and this new massive American South edition for 2025.
And that level of rapid global mapping is very, very expensive for Michelin, which leads us directly into the most controversial part of their modern business model.
The pay-to-play system.
Exactly. This is where the whole narrative of integrity versus commerce really clashes. The guide's reputation is built on them paying for everything.
To ensure independence.
Right. But now, tourism boards and governments are paying them substantial fees, often 7-figure fees, just to get coverage in the first place.
It suggests the financial model has completely shifted. It's less independent publishing and more subsidized global marketing.
And we have concrete examples. In 2016, the Korea Tourism Organization paid over $1 million to commission the guide for South Korea.
And it's now the standard practice. Thailand's tourism authority paid about $4.4 million over 5 years. The Florida expansion was secured after tourism boards there paid up to $1.5 million.
Atlanta paid $1 million over 3 years. And the new Northeast Cities edition for Boston and Philadelphia is the same deal. Meet Boston reportedly paid over $1 million for 3 years of coverage.
So I have to ask the obvious question. How does Michelin justify taking $1.5 million payment from the very region they claim to be reviewing impartially? Isn't that a clear conflict of interest?
Well, their argument is that the payment just covers the cost of operations in new markets where they don't have a revenue stream yet.
Yeah.
Paying for inspectors, travel, meals.
but critics argue it prioritizes the expansion dollars over rigorous review.
Of course, the integrity is definitely tested when the group paying for the coverage is the one who benefits economically from good reviews. And it's not just new markets.
Right, this is extending to places they already covered.
Exactly. Countries like Hungary, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic now have to pay for their coverage to continue. It shows the guide is monetizing its prestige, basically turning into a subscription service for tourism boards.
So what are the actual implications of this on the guide's credibility?
It creates real problems.
Yeah.
In South Korea, the government officials who paid for the guide were reportedly unhappy with the quality. They cited inaccuracies, typos, translation errors.
You pay millions, you expect a certain standard.
And it compounds older criticisms. When the New York Guide launched in 2005, there were immediate complaints that it was biased towards formal French-style dining.
Right. The New York Times pointed out that a lot of really influential American restaurants got no stars, while a disproportionate number of starred places could be considered French.
Julian Nicolini from the Four Seasons famously said Michelin should stay in France. And that perceived bias is a huge problem now, that local governments are paying them to highlight local culinary styles that are often the exact opposite of formal French service.
It's that tension between their European roots and the diverse markets they're trying to monetize.
And despite all this, they continue to adapt their delivery. They went digital first in 2021, ending most of the print editions after 121 years.
Though they haven't totally abandoned print. As of 2024, a few key markets, France, Italy, Japan, Spain, are still in print. It's a nod to history.
But the future is clearly digital and financially negotiated.
Which brings us to the pressure cooker. Because getting a star is one thing, but the pursuit, the retention, it comes at a huge human cost. We need to start with the former inspector who broke the code of silence.
The most famous controversy is probably the 2004 tell-all book, L'Inspecteur se met à table, by Pascal Remy. He was a veteran inspector in France whose employment was terminated just before the book came out.
And he painted a scathing picture, didn't he? He described a lonely, underpaid life, driving around France for weeks, eating alone, under huge pressure to file these reports.
But his biggest allegation was that the guide had become shockingly lax because it was so understaffed.
And that's the most damaging accusation because it hits their core promise of consistency.
Right. Michelin claims they visit all 4,000 reviewed restaurants in France every 18 months. Remy claimed that because there were so few inspectors, he said only 5 by the time he left, it was more like 1 visit every 3.5 years for many places.
Which would mean they're working off years-old data. He also alleged favoritism, right? That famous chefs like Paul Bocuse were untouchable and weren't subject to the same scrutiny.
He did. And Michelin, of course, denied all of it. But they notably refused to say how many inspectors they actually employed in France, which only fueled the speculation.
And whether his claims were totally accurate or not, the pressure associated with those stars is tragically real.
The most heartbreaking example is the death of chef Bernard Loiseau in 2003. He was the 3-star chef, and it's widely believed he died by suicide after hearing rumors that his restaurant was about to be demoted to 2 stars.
That one story just cemented the psychological power of the stars. It turned retention into a life-or-death struggle.
But the pressure isn't just about losing stars.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's about the crushing cost of having them. There's this strange phenomenon of chefs trying to return their stars.
The unwanted star. It's fascinating because it just contradicts everything you'd assume about the award.
These chefs realized the star created the wrong kind of customer expectations. People would show up expecting formal luxury and then complain if the place was more casual, forcing the chef to spend money on decor and service they never wanted.
We've got a few big examples. Chef Julio Biasca in Spain. He got a star, felt it restricted his creativity, and spent years trying to get rid of it.
Then there was Skye Gingle in London. She got a star for a cafe in a greenhouse setting and was flooded with complaints from people expecting stuffy, formal dining. She tried to give it back and eventually left the restaurant.
And Frederic Duge in Belgium summed it up perfectly. He said, "People expect a starred chef to give his own artistic interpretation. I just want to make a really good shrimp croquette."
It's that tension between rewarding expensive art versus just pure, high-quality cooking. And of course, the most famous rejection was Marco Pierre White, who dramatically returned his 3 stars in 1999.
Citing the intense, unrelenting pressure.
And this pressure ties directly into the big labor and sustainability issues in fine dining. Critics say the guide, by favoring the most labor-intensive and expensive styles of cooking, inadvertently reward systems that rely on cheap or unpaid labor.
You're talking about staging.
Exactly. The unpaid internship, where aspiring chefs work insane hours, 14, 16 hours a day, for months with no pay. It's seen as necessary to achieve the standards Michelin rewards.
And this all came to a head at Noma in Copenhagen, which was frequently called the best restaurant in the world.
It did. Chef René Redzepi finally gave in to public pressure in 2022 and announced they would start paying all their interns.
And what happened next is so telling about the reality of this model.
After just 3 months of paying them, Redzepi announced that Noma was no longer financially sustainable and that the restaurant would close at the end of 2024. The pursuit of Michelin-level food, when you pay the true cost of labor, was financially ruinous.
It casts a huge shadow over the whole pursuit of perfection. And there are so many reports of workers in these kitchens facing long hours, low pay, and systemic abuse, all in the name of the star.
And while many chefs say the competition and prestige make it worthwhile, there is an undeniable human cost.
Let's end this section on a lighter note, though. A story about the guide's own imperfection. Because human error does happen.
The 2017 case. A small, humble workman's cafe called Bouche Arrêt in Bourges, France, was accidentally given a full Michelin star.
They confused it with a high-end restaurant near Paris with a similar name.
And the result was chaos. The little cafe was suddenly slammed with sophisticated customers expecting 3-star artistry from a place that served simple blue-collar lunches. It was an instant, perfect demonstration of just how much power that tiny symbol holds.
Even when it's a mistake.
So we've really gone on the full journey today. The Michelin Guide started as a clever marketing tool to sell tires.
Just giving motorists practical information.
It then evolved through that key philosophical shift in 1920 to become this paid, professionally inspected guide.
And today, it operates as a globally influential, intensely secretive rating system. It uses this precise, almost legalistic language to define perfection, from worth a stop to worth a special journey.
But that prestige is now underpinned by a complex commercial model where cities and tourism boards are paying millions for inclusion.
And that quest for perfection comes with immense pressure, leading to tragic outcomes, chefs rejecting the stars, and really serious questions about labor and financial sustainability.
So what does this all mean for you, the diner? Well, the relentless pursuit of perfection, it undeniably drives innovation and quality. But our deep dive shows the hidden cost to the business owner, the worker, and the sanity of the chef.
Which raises an important and I think provocative question for you to mull over until our next deep dive.
We've established that countries and major cities, Thailand, Florida, Boston, are paying millions of dollars to the Guide for Inclusion.
So if you knew for a fact that the city you were visiting paid for its Michelin Guide, would that change how you view the quality, the consistency, the impartiality of the stars awarded to its restaurants?
That's something to think about. Thanks for listening. Okay, let's unpack this. When most people hear Ice Age, they picture this one single block of time.
Right, a deep freeze.
Exactly, a deep freeze that just happened once, a long time ago, maybe with a few woolly mammoths shivering somewhere. But that term,
Yeah.
it just glosses over the incredible complexity of what was actually happening.
It really does, because what we call the Ice Age isn't a single event at all. It's actually a whole series of cold and warm phases, part of this huge ongoing cycle.
And that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at the most recent, and you could argue the most influential, of those cold spells, the last glacial period, or the LGP.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to cut through some of that confusing terminology and really show you how the LGP, which it spanned from about 115,000 years ago down to around 11,700 years ago.
Covering most of the late Pleistocene.
Right, how it didn't just, cool the planet.
Yeah.
It completely restructured continents, it redirected massive rivers, and it basically set the biological stage for all of human history.
And that framing is so crucial to understand. The LGP wasn't just Earth's freezer switch getting flipped on. It's just the latest chapter in a much, much bigger story.
The ongoing quaternary glaciation.
Exactly. This bigger ice age started, around 2.5, maybe 2.6 million years ago. That's when the Arctic ice cap first started to form. And ever since then, it's just been this back and forth.
Between the cold phases where the ice advances, the glacials, and then the warmer phases where it retreats. the interglacial.
Precisely.
And if you're wondering, what kind of clock is the Earth running on to drive these huge climate swings, the answer is actually not on our planet at all.
That's right. The fundamental pacing mechanism for all of this is astronomical. It's these periodic, totally predictable variations in Earth's orbit.
The Milankovitch cycle.
Milankovitch cycles.
We're talking about three main things here, right? The tilt of the axis.
Yep. Obliquity.
The shape of the orbit, which gets more or less oval.
Eccentricity.
And then that slow wobble of the axis like a spinning top.
Precession. That's it. And they're tiny shifts, really, but they change how much solar energy hits the high latitudes, especially in the summer. And that's the key.
Okay, that's kind of counterintuitive. I'd think it would be about cold winters.
You think so, but the theory is that ice ages really kick off when the summers are just too cool to melt the previous winter's snow. So you start getting accumulation year after year.
And the ice sheet starts to grow.
And as it grows, it's bright white, so it reflects more sunlight back into space, which cools the planet even more. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop.
So within this long LGP timeline, there was a point of maximum cold, right? The absolute peak of all this.
Yes, the last glacial maximum, or LGM. The sources are pretty clear. This happened between about 26,000 and 20,000 years ago.
And at the LGM, you just had these vast regions buried under ice. I mean, in Canada, the ice was, what was it, nearly 2 miles thick.
In some places, yeah. It was a time of just immense environmental stress globally. It completely changed the rules for where and how life could even survive.
Okay, so here's our first big aha moment for you, right at the top. The end of the LGP is not the end of the Ice Age.
That's such a critical misconception. If you define an ice age geologically as a time with permanent ice near both poles, then we're still in one.
Because we still have Antarctica and Greenland.
Exactly. We are currently living in the Holocene epoch, which is just the latest warm interglacial phase within that much longer Quaternary ice age. Geologically speaking, we're just, enjoying a temporary thaw.
Makes you wonder what the next turn of that Milankovitch cycle might bring.
Yeah.
But for now, let's get into the consequences of that last big freeze.
Okay, so if we're going to synthesize the environment of the LGP, especially during the LGM, the biggest, most dramatic effect was the drop in global sea level.
And we're not talking a few feet. It was profound. The ocean surface was, up to 120 meters lower? That's almost 400 feet.
It is. All that water was just locked up on land in these colossal ice sheets. And when you expose that much continental shelf, well, you create land bridges.
And the most famous one has to be the Bering Land Bridge, Beringia connecting Siberia and Alaska.
That's the one.
I find this so fascinating because it wasn't just some narrow little strip of land. It was a huge, cold, dry plain, thousands of miles wide.
A whole subcontinent, really.
And it was the highway for mammals, for bison and horses, and of course for the first people moving from Asia into North America.
The timing of that bridge just fundamentally altered the landscape of two continents, both biologically and for humans. I mean, think about the ambition of that, crossing this exposed landscape into a completely new world, all because of a sea level drop caused by ice thousands of miles away.
But the period didn't just gently warm up into our modern era. It ended with a shock, right? A kind of a return to glacial conditions.
A massive climate hiccup. It was called the Younger Dryas. It starts around 12,800 years ago, and temperatures in the northern hemisphere just plunged right back towards glacial levels.
What caused that?
The leading theory is a disruption to the big ocean conveyor belt, the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, probably from a massive pulse of freshwater melt coming off the retreating ice sheets.
So the very thing that was ending the Ice Age, the meltwater, actually slammed the brakes on the warming and sent things back into a deep freeze for a bit.
For over 1,000 years, yeah. It was like Earth's final shiver before settling into the warmth of the Holocene. And the sharp warming that ended the Younger Dryas around 11,700 years ago, that's the official finish line. That's the end of the LGP in the Pleistocene.
And that transition, it wasn't just about geography, it was huge for biology. We're talking about the mass extinction of megafauna.
And what's fascinating here is the timing. This late Pleistocene period coincides almost perfectly with the extinction of all these big, charismatic animals.
Yeah.
The woolly mammoth, the giant ground sloth.
Saber-toothed cat, the Irish elk.
All of them. And it happens pretty rapidly, just after the LGM. And the timeline lines up broadly with the arrival of modern humans on these continents.
Which has led to one of the biggest debates in this whole field.
Oh, absolutely. It's basically climate stress versus the overkill hypothesis.
So on one side, you have the idea that as the climate warmed up and the habitats changed so quickly, These specialized big animals just couldn't adapt fast enough.
That's the climate argument. But then you have the overkill hypothesis, which basically says, well, we did it. As highly skilled human hunters moved into these pristine ecosystems, the local megafauna who had never seen predators like us were just wiped out.
So where do the sources land on this? Is it one or the other?
It's almost certainly both. It's an interaction. The climate change put the stress on the populations, made them smaller, more vulnerable.
And then human hunting pressure was the final blow.
Exactly. The LGP really set the stage for one of the biggest ecological turnovers in recent Earth history.
Okay, before we dive into the specific ice sheets, we have to talk about the terminology. It's a bit of a headache. If you're trying to read about the LGP, you see all these different local names.
It's confusing, but necessary. The cooling was global, but the local effects were different everywhere. So
Right.
geologists just named the period based on where they were studying the evidence.
Right. So in North America, you'd be talking about the Wisconsin glaciation.
That's the one that covers the huge Laurentide ice sheet.
But then if you hop across the Atlantic to the British Isles, it's the Devengian.
Yep. And then in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Germany, Russia, you're looking at the Weichselian or Vestulian glaciation.
And in the Alps, where so much of this research started, it's the Würm glaciation.
Exactly. And they all behaved a little differently. The Würm in the Alps was very different from the massive Weichselian sheet that covered the plains. It just highlights how specific the local evidence really is.
So let's zoom in on those giants now, the Northern Hemisphere ice sheets. This is where the LGP physically carved the world we see today.
And we have to start in North America with the absolute behemoth, the Laurentide ice sheet. It just smothered most of Canada and pushed way down into the northern U.S.
It's hard to even picture the scale. At its thickest point, it was 3 kilometers high, taller than any mountain east of the Rockies. That's the Wisconsin glaciation.
And while the Laurentide covered almost everything, there's this weird anomaly. Alaska and the Yukon were mostly ice-free.
Which seems so backwards. The land closest to the pole didn't get buried.
It's all about aridity. It was just too cold and dry. Cold air can't hold much moisture, and the huge ice sheets to the south and east blocked any moisture coming in from the Pacific. So not enough snow to build a glacier.
And that ice-free corridor, Beringia, was critical.
Absolutely. Now, the Wisconsin glaciation wasn't just sitting there. It was like a colossal bulldozer, totally changing the geography south of the ice.
Yeah, if you live anywhere north of the Ohio River or you've been to the Great Lakes, you're looking at a landscape sculpted by the LGP.
Here's where it gets really cool. The Great Lakes. The ice sheet didn't just create them. It took old river valleys and just scoured them out deeper and wider.
Like the world's biggest piece of sandpaper.
Exactly. And then when the ice retreated, those massive basins it carved just filled up with meltwater.
And the ice was so heavy it actually pushed the land down. And that land is still rising today, right? Isostatic rebound.
Still rising, and it's actually causing the Great Lakes to slowly tilt and drain southward.
Wow. And it didn't just make lakes, it rerouted entire river systems. The Ohio River, as we know it, is a product of the ice blocking an older, bigger river, the Tees River.
Even Niagara Falls is a feature of the retreat.
What about the East Coast?
If you've ever been to Cape Cod, Long Island, Martha's Vineyard, you've been to the edge of the glacier.
You mean the terminal moraines?
Exactly. The ice sheet was like a giant conveyor belt carrying rock and dirt. And where it stopped advancing, it just dumped all that debris in these huge ridges.
So those beautiful islands are basically just glacial garbage dumps.
The most scenic garbage dumps in the world, yeah.
Okay, let's head west. The other big one in North America was the Cordilleran ice sheet over the Rockies.
And this is where we get one of the most spectacular cataclysmic events of the entire period, Glacial Lake Missoula.
Okay, this is an incredible story. So there was this enormous lake.
In what's now western Montana, yeah. It was dammed up by a big lobe of ice from the Cordilleran sheet. It held about half the water of modern Lake Michigan, just a ticking time bomb made of ice and water.
And when that dam broke,
It didn't just leak, it unleashed a biblical flood, the Missoula floods. We are talking about a wall of water moving at 60 miles per hour, scouring eastern Washington. The flow is estimated at 10 times the flow of all the rivers in the world combined.
10 times.
The evidence it left behind, the channeled scablands, is just staggering. It carved deep canyons into solid bedrock, created huge dry waterfalls.
Yeah.
You can still see these massive ripple marks in the landscape today, some of them 50 feet high.
And the craziest part is that this wasn't a one-time thing.
No. This cycle, the lake forming, the dam breaking, the cataclysmic flood, and the lake reforming, it happened about 40 times.
40 times over 2,000 years. That's just mind-blowing.
It's one of the most powerful demonstrations of the raw power of deglaciation you can possibly imagine.
Okay, so let's cross the Arctic now over to Eurasia and the Michelin glaciation.
This was Europe's equivalent of the Laurentide. The Scandinavian ice sheet was immense. It covered all of Scandinavia, pushed into Britain, Germany, Poland, Russia.
And because of that ice and the low sea levels, a lot of the North Sea was dry land, right? The famous Doggerland.
Exactly, which connected Britain to the continent.
And in the Alps, we had the Würm glaciation. How is that different?
The Würm was more about big valley glaciers and smaller ice caps. It wasn't one single massive continental sheet, but it was still incredibly powerful. It basically scraped away almost all the evidence of earlier, even bigger glaciations.
But maybe the most complicated story from the European retreat is the birth of the Baltic Sea.
Oh, it's a geological melodrama. The Baltic we know today is actually really young, only about 4,000 years old in its current state. Its formation is this wild four-stage process of the land rising and the sea level changing.
Okay, so walk us through it. Stage 1, as the ice is melting.
The land is pushed down by the ice, so meltwater pools in the basin, but a connection to the ocean opens up, and you get a temporary saltwater body called the Yoldia Sea.
Saltwater, okay. But then the land starts to rebound.
Dramatically, the land rises up, and it actually cuts off that connection to the Atlantic. So now the basin is isolated, and it fills up with fresh water from all the continued melt. It becomes the huge freshwater Ancillus Lake.
But the story isn't over.
Not at all. Because while the land is rising locally, global sea levels are rising everywhere, and eventually the ocean rises high enough to breach the sill again.
And it becomes saltwater once more.
It becomes the Littorina Sea. And from there, it slowly evolves into the brackish system we have today. It's a perfect example of this tug-of-war between local land uplift and global sea level rise.
It's so easy to just focus on North America and Europe. But let's shift to the global periphery, from the tundra to, believe it or not, the tropics.
And right away, we see huge contrasts. While Scandinavia was buried, northeastern Siberia was mostly not covered by a big ice sheet.
Again, because it was too dry.
Exactly, too arid. So instead of a massive sheet, you had these restricted ice field complexes just covering the mountain ranges. It shows you it wasn't just uniform cold everywhere. It was a mosaic of cold and dry or cold and wet.
What about further south, in Asia's high mountains?
The Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, we definitely see evidence of major glacier advances there, but there's a big debate about whether it was one single massive ice sheet covering the whole plateau or just a lot of really big but separate mountain glaciers.
And the current thinking leans
Towards complex, localized glaciation, but the jury is still out on that one.
But the truly surprising thing is how close to the equator you find ice.
As long as you have the altitude, you can get glaciers anywhere. We see evidence in Taiwan and the Japanese Alps.
And in Africa.
Yep. Glaciers in the High Atlas in Morocco, and a pretty substantial ice cap, several hundred square kilometers covering the big East African mountains, Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, the Rwenzori.
Okay, let's pivot to the southern hemisphere. Glaciation was less extensive down there, but still pretty profound.
Antarctica, of course, was completely glaciated. But there's a weird counterintuitive detail from the ice models. They suggest that the ice over central East Antarctica was actually thinner during the LGP than it is today.
Thinner? How is that possible?
Again, moisture deprivation. Changes in atmospheric patterns basically starved it of snowfall. It really challenges that simple idea that the LGP just meant more ice everywhere.
And in South America, it was all about the Patagonian ice sheet.
Correct. It ran down the spine of the Andes, and you see this amazing contrast within the ice sheet itself. The western side, facing the Pacific, got tons of moisture, so it had wet basal conditions. The ice was sliding on a layer of meltwater, moving fast, carving aggressively.
While the eastern side was in the rain shadow.
So it was cold-based. The ice was frozen solid to the ground, moving much, much slower. It just shows you how local climate dictated how the glacier behaved.
And we even find tropical ice down there, too, in New Guinea.
We do. Mount Gilu had an ice cap covering about 188 square kilometers. And to maintain that, you needed temperatures about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius colder than today.
Okay, we have to end this section with this really important debate about glaciation in southern Africa, because it really highlights how tricky this all is.
It raises such a great question. How much can local evidence on the ground contradict these big global climate models? We know there were small glaciers in the Lesotho highlands in sheltered spots, but the idea of widespread glaciation is really debated.
Why? What's the argument against it?
Well, the geology. For one, there's a lack of classic glacial features, things that show the ice was moving and scraping. The big one is something called roche-moutonnées.
Sheep rocks.
Literally sheep rocks, yeah. It's a rock formation that's been smoothed on the side the glacier came from and plucked rough on the other side. It's the signature of a huge scrape. And the argument is those are mostly missing.
And that ties into a climate puzzle.
It does, because to get widespread ice there, you would have needed a temperature drop of 10 to 17 degrees Celsius. And a lot of researchers think that's just climatically implausible for that latitude. So the thinking is it was probably an arid periglacial environment. Cold and freezing, but without huge active glaciers.
So as fascinating as the ice itself was, we need to talk about what happened when it melted. The ongoing legacy.
The first and most obvious one is that process we keep coming back to, post-glacial isostatic rebound. The Earth is literally springing back into shape now that the colossal weight of the ice is gone.
How fast is it happening today?
It's surprisingly fast. In parts of Scandinavia, northern Sweden, and Finland, the land is still rising by as much as 8 to 9 millimeters a year.
Wow, that's almost a meter a century.
It is. And for you, the learner, this is a huge deal for archaeology.
How so?
Because ancient Stone Age coastal sites, villages that were right on the shore 8,000 years ago, are now miles inland. Archaeologists can literally date these sites based on how far they are from the current shore. The land itself is a clock.
That's incredible. But maybe the most provocative detail from our sources connects this ancient melt directly to potential future climate risks.
Ancient methane release, a 2017 study in the Barents Sea.
Right. So scientists found over 100 massive craters on the seafloor. And these are huge. Some are up to 3,000 meters wide.
Underwater mountain-sized craters. They were formed by explosive eruptions of methane.
From methane hydrates.
Exactly. Frozen methane trapped in the sediment. The ice sheets acted like a giant tap, the pressure keeping it stable. When the ice retreated, that pressure was suddenly released.
And it all just blew.
It blew. The researchers described it as like hundreds of champagne bottles being opened simultaneously on the seafloor.
And those areas are still seeping methane today.
They are. And this is where it gets really concerning. The study suggested that there are still other big methane reservoirs down there that could destabilize and erupt again. The LGP retreat was a unique trigger, but warming Arctic oceans today could be another one.
So let's try to synthesize all of this. The last glacial period was so much more than just the Ice Age.
It was a time of global cooling, sure, but with these profound local differences. You know, the Wisconsin in North America, the worm in the Alps. It completely reshaped North America, carving out the Great Lakes, leaving behind those coastal moraines.
Creating the Missoula floods.
Right. In Europe, it was responsible for that whole complex drama of the Baltic Sea's formation. And globally, it set the stage for the megafauna extinctions and the great human migrations. The real power of the LGP wasn't just in the advancing ice, it was in the chaotic, transformative retreat.
And the effects of that retreat, the land still rising, and especially the destabilization of these massive methane stores, they show us that Earth's ancient history is still an active geological force.
Yeah, the instability left behind by the ice over 11,000 years ago is still shaping our world and potentially our future.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you. Given what we know about the explosive release of ancient methane when the last ice sheets retreated, what consequences might the ongoing accelerated deglaciation of our current massive ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica unlock next?
It's a huge question. It brings geological time right into our present, doesn't it? The forces that were set in motion thousands of years ago are still very much in play.
Thank you for sharing your sources for this deep dive into the last glacial period. We'll catch you next time. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are taking your source material, all the history, the reports, the incredible research you've put together, and turning that information stack into a knowledge shortcut.
And today, we are jumping into something massive.
The Legion, the Roman Legion. I mean, where do you even start with a military unit that was operational for over 1,000 years?
Well, that's the thing, right? You start by understanding that we're not talking about a fixed entity. The Legion was, arguably the most successful fighting force in history, but its whole secret was that it never stood still.
It was constantly adapting.
Constantly. Its size, its makeup, even its job.
Yeah.
It all changed. It evolved from this small, part-time citizen levy into a permanent, professional imperial army.
And then it sort of broke down again at the end,
Which
right? Into smaller, more specialized units.
Exactly. It was a masterpiece of flexible organization, always responding to the world around it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our sources cover this whole journey from, the famous three-line formation of the Republic all the way to the insane pay scales for a top centurion and the brutal discipline that kept it all together.
Right.
So the mission for you, our listener, is to move past that textbook image of just a guy with a gladius and a shield and to really understand the organizational genius, the military machine that made all that conquest possible for centuries.
And just to set the scope, think about this. The basic definition is simple. A legion is made up of Roman citizens, legionaries.
Okay.
But the numbers are all over the place. In the Republic, you might be looking at 4,200 infantry and maybe 300 cavalry.
Pretty specific.
Then in the early imperial period, it standardizes to around 5,500 men. But by the 4th century AD, that same name, legio, could mean a unit of just 1,000, maybe 1,500 guys.
Wow. So the name stays, but the thing itself is completely different.
Fundamentally reshaped. Always. That's the key.
That flexibility, that willingness to just tear up the playbook and redesign your core unit, that might be the secret ingredient right there. So let's start at the beginning. Where did this all come from?
We have to go way back. Roman Kingdom era, before the Republic is even really a thing. Our sources suggest that back then, the word legiti might have just meant the entire Roman army, the whole lot.
So it wasn't a unit, it was everybody.
Pretty much. And their way of fighting was heavily influenced by their neighbors, the Etruscans, but also the big military idea of the time was the Greek and Macedonian phalanx.
That big block of spears.
Right. But the legion we really think of, its identity is totally different in the early and mid-Republic. This was not a professional army.
Right. This is a key point.
A huge point. From about 509 BC until the big reforms around 107 BC, the legion was a citizen levy, pure and simple. If you owned property, you had a duty to serve.
So you're conscripted.
Only when there was a war. The second the conflict ended, the legion was disbanded. The men went right back to their farms, their shops. There was no such thing as a standing army.
That changes everything about motivation, doesn't it? I mean, you're not signing up for a 25-year career and a pension.
Not at all.
So why do it? Why leave your farm and risk your life?
The reward was short-term. It was loot, plunder. If your campaign was successful, you came home with treasure, with goods, with slaves.
Which for a property owner would be a massive boost to your wealth and your status?
A huge boost. It's a very transactional system. It worked great for short local wars, but as Rome's ambitions got bigger, it started to fall apart.
And the military system for that kind of local warfare was the famous manipular system. When did that come about?
That really gets going after a huge defeat. The Gauls sack Rome around 387 BC, and the Romans realized that their rigid phalanx just didn't work in the hill terrain of Italy.
They needed to be more flexible.
Exactly. So they developed this new system. The definitive version, the one the historian Polybius wrote about, was a huge shift.
And how did that work?
The key was organizing by age and experience, not just social class. And they changed the gear. They dropped the long spears for the front two lines and adopted the gladius, that short stabbing sword, and two heavy javelins called pila.
For that devastating opening volley.
You got it.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was set up in 3 distinct lines of heavy infantry.
Okay, let's break those down because this is the core of the Republic's army. First up, the hastati.
The hastati. These are your rookies, the youngest, least experienced guys, and they put them right at the front.
Which sounds kind of brutal.
It's brutally pragmatic. It's where they get experience. And if they break and run, well, you've still got your 2 best lines behind them ready to go.
So the front line is basically a training ground that also soaks up the first attack. What's behind them?
Behind them, you have the principes. These are the guys in their prime. More experienced, better equipped, they are the main battle line.
So if the Hastati fall back,
They retreat through gaps left in the Principes line, who then step forward and hit an enemy that's already tired and disorganized from the first fight.
a brilliant system of staggered force. And then the legendary last line, the guys who gave us an idiom, the Triari.
The Triari, these are the veterans, the oldest, most experienced soldiers in the army, the elite corps. And they were used only when things were absolutely desperate.
And they thought differently, right?
They did. They were the one line that kept the long spears, the haste, and they fought in a dense phalanx. Can you imagine the psychological shock for an enemy? You think you've broken 2 Roman lines, you're exhausted, and then this fresh, impenetrable wall of spear points and heavy armor stands up and starts moving towards you.
And that's where you get the phrase, ad triarios ridis, to fall back on the Triari.
Meaning you're playing your last card, you're using your final, most trusted resort. It's amazing how a military tactic becomes part of the language.
It really is. But this whole system, it depended on having enough citizens who owned property. As Rome expanded, that started to become a problem.
A massive problem. Which brings us to the next great transformation. The late Republic, around 100 BC, and the reforms of Gaius Marius. This is the birth of the professional army.
This is where everything changes.
Everything. The property requirement was completely dropped. The army became a voluntary professional career path.
And with that professionalism, you get standardization. So those 3 different lines, they're gone.
All gone. They were replaced by a single standard type of heavy infantryman. Everyone was equipped and trained the same way, like the old Principes. Everyone gets a gladius, pala, a helmet, chainmail armor, and that big rectangular scutum shield.
Which makes training and logistics so much easier.
Infinitely easier. And tactically, they shift from the maniple to the cohort system.
Why was the cohort better for a professional army?
It was bigger, more robust. A legion was now 10 cohorts. A standard cohort was made up of 6 centuries of 80 men each.
So about 480 men.
Right. It's a much bigger tactical block to maneuver on the battlefield than the old maniples. It gave generals way more flexibility.
But the first cohort was different. It was special.
The first cohort was the elite unit. It was double strength, around 800 men. It had the best soldiers, the most prestige. It was the anchor of the whole formation.
Now, we can't talk about the Imperial Legion without talking about the other half of the army, the guys who weren't citizens, the auxiliaries.
Absolutely essential. The auxilia, these were non-citizens, the peregrini, recruited from all over the provinces. They did all the jobs the heavy infantry couldn't.
So, cavalry, archers?
Archers from Syria, heavy cavalry from Gaul and Spain, light infantry, skirmishers, you name it, they were indispensable.
And what's so fascinating is the deal they got. Service in the auxiliaries was a direct path to becoming a Roman citizen.
It was a huge engine of Romanization. You serve your 25 years honorably, you get discharged, and boom, you and often your family are now Roman citizens.
That's an incredible way to secure loyalty from the provinces.
And just think about the scale. By the time of the Severan dynasty, sources suggest auxiliaries made up something like 55 to 60% of the total Roman army.
Wait, more than half. So the classic image of the Roman army as just legions of citizens is wrong.
It's misleading. It was a combined arms force, with the core of citizen legions supported by a massive, specialized, non-citizen auxiliary force.
And this whole shift to a professional army had, well, devastating political consequences back in the Republic.
It's the tragedy of the late Republic. When the army became a career, a soldier's loyalty was no longer to the abstract idea of the state, but to the general who promised him pay, land, and retirement benefits.
To men like Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar.
Exactly. A general's legions became his political power base, which leads directly to civil war.
Caesar crossing the Rubicon with his legion. That's the point of no return.
It's a direct military challenge to the Republic's authority, and even later, under the Empire, the legions are the kingmakers. In the Year of the Four Emperors, it's the legions on the Danube and in Syria that decide Vespasian will be emperor. Their support was everything.
So when Augustus becomes the first emperor, he has to get this under control. What were his big reforms?
He brings order. He stabilizes the number of legions down to 28, and then, famously, down to 25 after a massive disaster.
The Teutoburg Forest, the Varian disaster.
The complete annihilation of 3 entire legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, by Germanic tribes. It was such a shocking, traumatic loss that those legion numbers were never used again. Augustus is said to have cried out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions."
And besides cutting the numbers, he made service a permanent 25-year contract.
Right. And he stationed them in fixed, permanent fortresses, the Castra Legionaria, out on the frontiers, far away from the political heart of the empire. This created the stable, professional imperial army that guarded the borders for centuries.
So that 5,000-man Imperial Legion becomes the standard for a few hundred years. But then, as the empire comes under more and more pressure, that model also starts to break down.
It does. The empire was just too big, the frontiers too long for these huge, slow-moving armies. Under emperors like Diocletian and Constantine, the military has to change again.
So they break up the big legions.
They do. They get broken down into smaller, more mobile units. A legion in the 4th century might only be 1,000 or 1,500 men, and they're specialized.
Okay, so what were these new types of units?
You basically get 3 tiers. At the top, you have the elite mobile strike forces, the Legiones Palatinae, the Palace Legions, highly trained, often heavy cavalry, the Emperor's rapid response force.
Yeah, below them.
You have the main field army, the comitenses. They're the ones who respond to major invasions. Still high quality, but a step below the Palatinae.
And holding the line.
You have the Limitinae, the border guards. They were permanently stationed along the frontiers, the limes, and they became almost a kind of part-time militia, farming their own land grants. The whole strategy shifted from offense to defense.
It's just incredible how that word legi survives, but what it means is completely transformed again and again.
Adaptability.
Yeah.
Not rigidity. That was their superpower.
Now that we have the structure, let's get inside the ranks. The command structure is fascinating because it's not just a military hierarchy, it feels like a government agency.
Or an early militarized corporation. That's a great way to think about it.
So who's at the very top? Who's commanding this force of 5,000 men?
That's the legatus legionis, the legionary legate. He's a senator, a political appointee, usually there for 3 or 4 years as a stepping stone in his career.
So he's not necessarily a career soldier.
Not at all. He's a politician. And if his province only had 1 legion, he was also the provincial governor. So he held both military and civil power.
And his second in command.
That's the Tribunus Laticlavius, the broadband tribune. Another young guy of senatorial rank, even less experienced, just checking a box on his way up the political ladder.
So your top 2 commanders are political appointees. Who's the guy who actually knows how to run an army?
Ah, that's the number 3, the Praefectus Castrorum, the camp prefect. This guy is the real deal, a long-serving career veteran who has risen all the way up from the ranks.
He's the institutional memory of the Legion.
He's everything. He's in charge of training, logistics, the camp itself. He's lower in social status than the political guys, but he's the operational expert. It's a brilliant system of checks and balances.
And then you have a whole staff of other officers.
5 more tribunes, the Tribuni Angusticlavi. These are the administrators, the managers from the equestrian class. They handle the supply chains, the payroll, the endless paperwork. It's a massive bureaucratic operation.
But the real engines of the whole machine, the guys who made it work day to day, the centurions.
The absolute backbone of the army, you had about 59 or 60 of them in a legion. They ran everything. Drills, discipline, field commands, everything.
And their pay reflected that.
10 times the basic wage of a regular soldier. They were the essential middle management.
And it wasn't just one rank, was it? It was this intensely competitive career path.
Incredibly stratified. At the very top was the Primus Pilus, the first file, the most senior centurion in the entire legion.
And his pay was just staggering.
60 times the base legionary wage.
60. I mean, that puts him into the upper class just through his military career.
That was the point. After a year as Primus Pilus, he retired and was automatically granted equestrian status. It was a path to immense wealth and social mobility, rewarding pure, proven competence.
But getting there must have been incredibly difficult.
Almost impossible for most. There's this great anecdote about a centurion named Petronius Fortunatus. Our sources show he served for an unbelievable 42 years.
42 years?
In 12 different legions, a total pro. But in all that time, he never made it to the top ranks, the Prima Ordiens. It just shows how tough that climb was.
So what about the regular guy, the basic legionary, the Caligatus? What's his financial reality?
Well, his base pay started at 225 denarii a year, and it went up over time. But you have to understand, that's gross pay.
The deductions.
Exactly. Money was immediately taken out for your food, your boots, your equipment. You were definitely not taking home that full amount.
There were ways to earn more, right? For specialized roles.
Yes, the army valued skills. You had the duplicarius, who got double pay, and the sesquiplicarius at 1.5 times pay. This was for guys like the Optio, the Centurion second in command, and the standard bearers.
And this brings us back to the militarized corporation idea. The Legion had its own bank.
It did. And the banker was the signifer, the guy who carried the century standard, the signum.
And he got double pay for that.
He did, because he was also the unit's financial administrator. He handled the payroll, the deductions, and he held the soldiers' savings in a common strongbox. He was their banker on the march.
That's an incredible level of financial sophistication for an army in the field. And what about the other specialists? The guys who weren't just fighters?
You're talking about the immunes. These were soldiers who were exempt immune from manual labor and routine guard duty because their skills were too valuable.
Like who?
Engineers, doctors, clerks, armorers, surveyors, the technical experts. This shows you how much Rome valued that specialized knowledge. They weren't going to have their best engineer digging a latrine.
It's a deliberate strategic choice. The bureaucracy, the technical skill, was just as important as the fighting.
It was essential to keeping 5,000 men functioning hundreds of miles from home.
And then, after all that, if you survived for 25 years, you got the ultimate prize.
Yeah.
The retirement package. The premia.
A huge incentive. You got a big cash payout starting at 3,000 denarii under Augustus, and often a plot of good farmland.
Which also served another
A
purpose.
huge political purpose. You settle these loyal, experienced veterans in newly conquered or unstable frontier areas, and they help to stabilize and Romanize the region. It's a retirement plan and a state-building program all in one.
Incredible. So if pay and structure provided the incentive, you still need something to hold it all together under extreme stress. And that's where symbols and discipline come in.
Absolutely. They provided the cohesion, the glue.
Let's start with the most powerful symbol of all, the aquila, the eagle.
From 104 BC on, the eagle was the sacred standard of the entire legion. It was carried by the aquilifer, who, again, got double pay for the immense honor and responsibility.
It wasn't just a flag.
Oh, no. It was the living embodiment of the legion's honor, its soul. To lose the eagle was the ultimate disgrace. A legion that lost its eagle was often disbanded in shame.
And there's that amazing story from Caesar's invasion of Britain that shows just how powerful that symbol was.
It's incredible. His troops are on the ships, and they're hesitating to land because the Britons are all waiting for them on the beach. They're scared.
And what happens?
The aquilifer of the famed 10th Legion, seeing this, just leaps into the water by himself, holding the eagle high, and starts wading towards the shore. He basically shames his comrades into following him because they could not bear the disgrace of the eagle being lost.
The fear of shame was a better weapon than a sword. What other symbols did they use?
Loyalty was constantly being reinforced. You had the imaginifer, who carried the imago, a standard with a 3D portrait of the reigning emperor on it, a constant visual reminder of who you're fighting for.
Right. And then what about when parts of the Legion were operating separately?
They'd carry a vexillum, which was a smaller banner. These detached units were called vexillationes. It allowed them to maintain their unit identity and morale even when they were hundreds of miles from the main force.
Okay, so that's the cohesion. Now let's talk about the fear, the unbelievably harsh military law. Even for minor stuff, it was severe.
It was. The most common punishment was castigatio, basically getting hit by your centurion staff.
Right.
Or you could get your pay docked or be forced to eat barley instead of wheat, which was a huge humiliation.
And for more serious things.
Flogging. And the worst personal punishment was a dishonorable discharge, the missio ignominiosa. You lose everything, your retirement, your honor, everything.
But the major punishments were on another level entirely. They were designed to create terror. Let's talk about festuarium.
This was the death sentence for things like desertion or falling asleep on guard duty, and the execution was communal.
What do you mean?
The guilty soldier would be beaten or stoned to death by his own comrades, right in front of the entire legion. It was brutal, but it made every single soldier complicit in upholding the law.
And then there's the most infamous one of all, decimation.
The ultimate collective punishment used for mutiny or mass cowardice. The entire unit would be forced to draw lots.
Yeah.
And 1 out of every 10 men would be beaten to death by the other 9.
By their own friends.
For the men they marched and fought with. Can you imagine the psychological horror of that? It was a tool to absolutely crush any thought of group insubordination.
It's just an overwhelming system of control. So when you put it all together, the structure, the pay, the symbols, the discipline, What were the big picture reasons for their long-term success?
Well, the philosopher Montesquieu really nailed it. He said the Romans became masters of the world because they were always willing to drop their own practices when they found better ones. Adaptability, that was their
We've
genius.
seen that again and again.
They could take a catastrophic beating from someone like Hannibal, lose entire armies, and just raise new ones. Their administrative system and their manpower pool allowed them to absorb losses that would have destroyed any other power. Sheer bloody-minded persistence.
And they were always willing to steal the best ideas.
Always. The gladius sword from the Spanish, warship design from the Carthaginians, they had no pride about it. If it worked, it was now Roman.
And they had a technical edge, too.
A huge one. Especially in the late Republic and Empire, every legionary had high-quality, standardized armor, a helmet, a great shield. That gave them a massive advantage over most tribal opponents. And their training was relentless. They were taught to thrust with the sword, not slash. It's less tiring and far more deadly.
And finally, something we keep coming back to, their engineering.
Unmatched. The fact that a legion on the march would build a fully fortified camp, the castra, every single night in just a few hours. That's a strategic game changer. It meant they were never truly vulnerable. They carried their fortress with them, logistics, road building, siege warfare. They treated these as core military skills.
So it's that whole package: discipline, organization, adaptation, and engineering. The machine.
That's the machine, and that's our deep dive. We've seen this unit constantly redefine itself, from that citizen militia with its maniballs to the professional cohort-based army that built the empire, and then into the smaller mobile forces of the late empire.
And the longevity is just mind-boggling. You think about modern military units, but our sources confirm that one legion, Legio V Macedonica, was founded in 43 BC and was still a fighting unit in Egypt in the 7th century AD when the region fell to Islamic armies.
Over 600 years. It's almost unbelievable.
So what's the final takeaway here?
I think the central insight is that the Legion's success wasn't just about fighting prowess. It was built on meticulous, almost modern administration. By creating roles for specialists like the immunes, and by having a sophisticated financial system run by the signifer, they made sure the bureaucratic and logistical support was always there. It was prioritized, it was paid for.
So the whole structure, with its clear career path where you could literally rise from the ranks to the equestrian class, really does feel like a corporation.
It's an incredibly efficient, militarized corporation. It provided stability and a chance at social mobility in exchange for total obedience. And its organizational template, its DNA, would influence military and government structures for the next 2,000 years.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought.
It does. If the Roman legion was a corporation, what product were they selling? Conquest is the obvious answer. But I think it was something more fundamental. They were selling standardized, repeatable, and scalable security. And based on how long they were in business, they had the most effective business model in the ancient world.
A corporate model that literally drew the map of Europe. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the magnificent machine that was the Roman Legion. We'll see you next time.